Welcome to Self-Funded. I'm your host, Chrissie Francona. 10 years ago, starting a business around yourself was something reserved for celebrities. Today, professionals everywhere are breaking away from the 9-to-5 and building businesses around their own experience and expertise. On this show, we'll explore what it really means to be self-funded, the movement of professionals carving their own path, creating cash-flowing businesses, and building lasting impact without waiting for permission. I'll share my own journey and talk with others who are rethinking what's possible when you take your career into your own hands. Let's dive in. Happy 2026. It's January 8th when I'm recording this, so I still feel like I'm in the window of being able to say Happy New Year. So, like so many people, I'm in that reflective window that comes with the start of a new year. And for me, I'm reflecting on the last year, which was my first full year running The Long Game, which is my growth stage consulting talent network. I started The Long Game after leaving a VP role 13 weeks pregnant in July of 2024. Certainly not the timing that anyone would necessarily recommend. But for me, it was something I had been thinking about and planning for years. And so it made sense. That being said, 2024 was really humbling. I thought I would have projects right away. I did not. I thought that many people who I considered to be champions or mentors would refer me to clients. They did not. And when you leave your job, people look at you and think of you differently. I know we don't necessarily think of our job as our identity, but for some people, you are your role. And so when you leave your role, the relationship just fundamentally changes. There was certainly some good, many good connections. I got a lot of outreach from people who admired or respected what I was doing. I reconnected with a lot of people in my network who I had met years or even a decade plus ago, and it was a great opportunity to reconnect and come together in a new way. But there were also these disappointments. People I thought I had a deeper relationship with that once I left that title and company, I just wasn't as important to them. And frankly, that was a hard thing to process. So in some ways, 2025 was my fresh start. The fall of 2024, I would have called my trough of sorrow. So if you're familiar with Paul Graham's term for this early startup ebb and flow, the trough of sorrow is really that moment of just, despair, for lack of a better term. And that's a lot of what I felt that fall. And as I mentioned, being 13 weeks pregnant when I left my job, it meant that my due date was January 2025. And so I had this artificial timeline on my progress. I remember talking to a dear mentor of mine late in 2024. I was struggling to find a fit and generate business. And she said to me, "You get 2 starts at this. This is your testing period, your soft launch. You get another launch after you have your baby." This resonated so much with me and also just took the pressure off. And I realized it just made a lot of sense. I did have a second start, and really you define what your start is. There's no one else who's defining that for you. But for me, it really just made me think of that fall of 2024 much more as a testing period and then really launching after I had my baby. And so I didn't take a lot of time off, but as I transitioned back into work in sort of later Q1 of 2025, those seeds that I had planted started to grow. So here I am a year later. I have an almost 1-year-old and a business that is deepening those roots. And so I want to share 3 mistakes that I made in my first year, plus my first year and a half or so, we'll call it a year, of starting The Long Game and what I do differently today. The first mistake that I made was I started with my end game. As I mentioned, I had been thinking about the long game for years, and perhaps on a different episode, I'll go through the ideation process and the factors that I considered and where I saw the opportunity. But the short version is I had started my career in consulting, working for the largest companies in the world and the largest private equity firms. And then when I was an executive or VP level at DraftKings, I ended up being a client of my old consulting firm, Bain, but other consulting firms as well. And it was just a very different experience to be on that side of the table. And I saw a gap there and an opportunity that growth stage companies needed talented individuals to work with them on these strategic projects, but they didn't necessarily need or frankly could afford really large consulting firms. And then at the same time, I just started to see a lot of really talented people in my network who were leaving to do more flexible work. And so I started the long game really to match those sides, to build this talent network and build a client base that would benefit from the experience and expertise of this talent. I've always considered myself to be patient zero. That's something I talk about. So I take on client projects myself and really saw this as sort of how do I build this business around my own experience and expertise, but then also expand beyond there. So my vision has always been building a larger talent network and connecting growth stage companies with talented professionals who want this flexible outcome-oriented project work. But as I thought about building this, I really wasn't sure which side would hit first. There's the client side of building the BD pipeline, connecting with prospective clients, understanding their needs. And then there's also the talent side. So that's more the supply side of how am I actually going to fill these projects. So I just wasn't sure which side would hit first. And so when I ended up launching the long game in September of 2024, I really put it out of both sides. So from day one, I was building a talent network. And while that was always my end goal, I look back and really try to understand why was I so focused on launching that from day one. And I think for me, I felt like I needed to show people that I was building something bigger than myself. Like I had this little, I don't know the best way to describe it, but a little bit of maybe a chip on my shoulder of I couldn't just leave and do freelance consulting. But that ultimately was where I was starting. But I did have this vision of something bigger. So going back to September 2024, I launched this business with a LinkedIn post saying, hey, I'm consulting for growth stage companies. Here's the opportunity I see. And I'm building this talent network. And so as you can probably predict, and certainly I can now, the talent side was definitely the side that hit first. The response honestly was phenomenal. Like I didn't know if I would have people who were just in my network or just a few people trickling in. And within really the first 24, 36, 48 hours, I had a couple hundred people who had submitted interest, and the vast majority of them were second or even third degree connections. So the message really resonated with the talent side from day one. And that was really exciting to me. And the people I was connecting with had incredible backgrounds and definitely the skill set. So in thinking about kind of proving out the concept of the long game, I felt very confidently early on that the talent side was there. However, by focusing on the talent side, or really by launching both at once and having the talent response be so phenomenal, I found myself focused almost entirely on talent calls the first few weeks of launch. I really wasn't doing BD, but I was telling myself that I was building the business, and it was exhausting. There were some days where I had 9 talent calls back to back. And clearly this was also just a lesson in calendar management and a lesson in screening, and all of that I have since corrected. But the bigger lesson for me was I wasn't focused on the right thing. And this was also probably confusing to the talent. I tried to be as transparent as possible that I was building both sides. This was, early days, building the pipeline. But I remember one call in particular, the person seemed to think it was a job interview for a specific project, and it honestly broke my heart. I felt really bad that I think she had geared herself up for what she thought was an interview for a project, and I wasn't able to deliver that. And so I really just reassessed, where am I spending my time? How am I spending my time? And what does that look like? So what would I do differently from a launch perspective if I were doing it today? I would focus on taking the smallest amount of action that will drive revenue. Self-funded businesses need to generate revenue ASAP. That is the nature of them. They are not venture-backed plays where you're focusing on building a user base that you'll monetize later. You start with monetizing your time. Even if it's not the ideal place to start, I would have taken whatever projects I could find within reason that sort of generally fit my thesis. And I may talk about that on another episode of how to screen that early on and refine your screening. But for now, I'll just say, certainly if it was something that I talk a lot about my scope is what it is not is I don't do product tech go to market. Those are the areas that within a growth stage company, I think should be owned in-house and usually are the areas that are represented on a founding or kind of post-founding team. So, but anything outside of that within reason, I might have taken and then really worked to build the BD side. So I think BD there's a huge aspect of momentum. So certainly having a project, I think makes it easier to find the next project. You have something to speak to. You're also not desperate, so that helps. So I really would have built that side first and then scaled myself out of it. The other thing that I probably just didn't give myself credit for is I actually am really good on the talent side and for finding people for specific projects. So even as I now have this talent network that has a few hundred people overall, and I've screened probably at least 150 of them and feel comfortable with them as people who could be a fit for some of the work we do, I do still find myself kind of tapping into my network if there's a more specific need. So I had an M&A project a few months ago that had a specific geographic location. And so while I had M&A folks in or more integration folks in my network, I found myself sort of going to LinkedIn and really using my sleuthing skills to find people. And I did. I ended up finding some great talent who now I would say are a part of the broader network. So I think I felt early on like I have to prove this side of the business, but also looking back, I myself in my notion of being patient zero, I am the talent side. I am sort of the prototype of the talent side. So I don't know that I necessarily had to prove it as much as I may have thought. The second mistake that I made, and this is probably related, but I did not guard my calendar with my life. And I talked about this on a previous episode, but I would take any catch-up, connection, introduction that came my way. And yes, I get it. Your calendar's empty and people are trying to be helpful and you're not sure where things will lead. But it's also, I think it relates to not focusing on BD. I found myself asking for feedback too often. Feedback can be helpful, but it can also be a guise for asking for permission. And you do not need permission to start a self-funded business. Looking back, I was quote unquote playing business. I was keeping busy, but I was not driving results. Your time is your capital in a self-funded business. And I talked about this in a previous episode. You should be running experiments. You should be testing your hypothesis, which assumes you have a hypothesis, which you should. So thinking about developing a hypothesis, I would look at who needs your expertise, why, and what can you deliver in terms of results. And then figure out the who. Who are your customers? Is it founders of a specific size and scope? Is it investors at a specific stage? Is it a specific functional executive? Is it an industry? And then test your hypothesis through these early calls. I remember one call early on with a portfolio lead for a lower mid-market private equity fund. We had a great conversation, but she didn't really get what I was trying to do. But looking back on it, the companies in her portfolio were probably too small for what I was trying to focus on. So rather than feel bad about the conversation, which I did actually, I should have taken the reaction as another piece of data to drive my ideal customer identification. So start with this call, learn from it, and then pivot. But try to center those calls on your customer avatar. So not just networking where you can get time on someone's calendar or people might want to be helpful, but the introductions actually set you off course. But be really intentional with who you're trying to talk to and evolve from there. The third mistake that I made was I got too attached to specific opportunities. Early on, I had a former colleague reach out with a potential opportunity. We had one call together, then a second with him and a team member of his. And it seemed like from that, we'd have a final call and the deal would be done. But as you might suspect, I was super excited. I felt like I instantly had found my first project that would take me through the end of the year, and I was pumped. And as you'll recall, I was pregnant. And so I had this bit of this artificial timeline of, okay, I want to take on work until I have my child and then take some time off and then get back to it. So I thought this was great. I thought I had found the project that would take me until I had my baby and I felt set. And I honestly paused on a lot of other BD because I thought, well, I don't want to not be available, when this starts. And as you might suspect, again, I struggled to get a response to get that next call set. I did not have a clear scope in place, and I certainly did not have any sort of contract. If I were to do this over, first of all, I wouldn't assume anything. Even now, when I get a verbal yes, I do not assume anything until a contract is signed. Second, I would get a lot clearer on the outcome that he was trying to achieve and what sort of investment and engagement level he wanted. I think he genuinely was excited to potentially work with me, but hadn't thought through exactly what it would look like or what needs he had before reaching out. And I do find this sometimes where, especially some of the early relationship-based opportunities where someone finds out you're available and has worked with you in the past and knows that you're experienced and talented and a good person to work with. So you sort of check all those boxes. And so I think some of that outreach tends to be like, hey, I like you and would love to find a way to work together, but it's not necessarily problem oriented. Where I find a much better fit now is a prospective client has a specific problem they're trying to solve, and they come to me, whether they know me before, it's through an intro, or they find the long game. They believe that I and the long game can solve that problem. That is a much better path than someone just really likes you and wants to find a way to work together. Those can work out, but I think they can also lead to the situation that I had. I would get a lot clearer additionally on the outcome that he was trying to achieve. So even if it was, hey, I really like you and want to find a way to work together, I would really try to reframe the conversation to focus on that outcome. So I think the mistake that I made was what I interpreted as a done deal was just really this high level catch up. And there's nothing wrong with that, but I would not get my hopes up as I did in that moment. And I talked a little bit about this, but I think the mindset shift comes with a move from scarcity to abundance. So build the pipeline, have a lot of top of funnel conversations, knowing that many of them won't lead to specific work. And then just get really clear on the need and the timing. I've found, particularly with the work that I'm doing, there needs to be a forcing function. I work with companies often on optimizing their operations for scale. And I see the problem. I'll talk to an investor or founder and I see it immediately. But unless it is a burning pain point, oftentimes a founder or CEO is just not in the window to solve it. They are able to get by day to day. It's not something that's affecting their revenue or, the bloated costs aren't necessarily leading to adverse outcomes at that time. So even if they see the problem or they're frustrated with it, they don't necessarily need or want to solve it right now. So you can have a great conversation, but try to keep it as the first in a long series that may lead to work now, it may lead to work later, or it may not lead to work at all. And that's okay. Not everything needs to lead to work. But if you consistently, I would say if 80% of the time you focus your calendar and your conversations on clients that you think or people you think are in your customer avatar or represent your customer avatar, you see some sort of opportunity there, and then you play the long game, no pun intended, but you treat it as the first in a series of conversations, I think you're in a much better position than I found myself in those early days. So as I sit here still in the Happy New Year window of 2026, I look back on everything I've learned in the last 18 months and realize that I'm going to continue to learn. I'm going to take these lessons into 2026. And I bet in a year, when it's January 2027, I'm going to have a whole other set of the 3 mistakes, and frankly, a lot more, but the 3 top mistakes I made in 2027. Starting a self-funded business is a process of iterative change. You learn, you adapt, and you move forward toward the business and the life that you're trying to build. So if you are already in your self-funded business, I wish you luck in 2026. If you are in a full-time role and you found this podcast because you're thinking about taking a self-funded route, I hope that the next weeks and months and this year is a time of reflection and feedback and honing in on what you want to or believe that you can build. Thanks for listening, and I hope your new year is off to a great start. Thanks for listening to Self-Funded. If you enjoyed today's episode, be sure to follow the show wherever you're listening so you don't miss what's coming next. I'd also love for you to leave a review and share what you're most excited about on your own self-funded journey. And if you want to go deeper, check out my Substack. You'll find the link below. Until next time, keep carving your own path.